As the name implies, we will be talking about city cycling and, using this for transportation, but it also kind of covers everything else that everybody's talking about, that fitness aspect, if you're group riding. And so there's a lot that we're going to cover. The first thing that I kind of want to do, though, is thank our Johnson County sponsor. This event is part of what's called the Women's Bike Summit, and so that is going to be a half-day event that is coming in September. It'll be here at the Central Resource Library. So this is a day where you get to be best friends with your bike. So it's teaching women and for women, but we're going to do a lot of maintenance. We will have some group rides there. We're going to try and get somebody here who can fit individuals on their bikes so that they're more comfortable riding. But leading up to the summit, we are having these speaker events. And so we've already had one, and that was called Riding Through the Ages. And so we encouraged women of different ages and with different intentions with riding to come and speak to everybody about their journey. So we had from 8 years old to up in their 70s, women who were speaking on their experience. And then we have this Confident City Cycling. You may have a little postcard that was given when you first came in, and so that lists some of those other ones. And our next one that's coming up that I'm really excited about is called Inclusive Ride Groups. And so we are bringing in speakers who are representing different ride groups that you can find here in Kansas City, even out to Lawrence, even ones that have chapters that are national chapters but have local, or national organizations that have local chapters. So I think that'll be really great so that you can find somebody to talk to and hopefully find, a group that fits your interests, and maybe kind of step outside your comfort zone and try working with another group that you just weren't aware was out there, but you want to learn more. So that postcard is out there. Other little housekeeping things, like I've already kind of mentioned, is that there's bathrooms. You just head towards the left here. There's also vending machines, but we do have some snacks back there. If you hadn't already picked up from the table all the goodies that we brought, so we do have like a little, it's called Lever Plus. It is a tire lever multi-tool. So there's also like some little hex wrenches and screwdrivers. You can wrap it around your bicycle tire, and I can explain more about the details of it later. There's all kinds of good stuff out there, but I will cover kind of a lot of stuff today. So if I'm at any point going too fast, or use like an acronym or something or an abbreviation, please raise your hand and say, wait, what was that? I didn't catch what that was. So this is meant to be an open kind of discussion, so please ask your questions, add your comments. But what I kind of wanted to do at the very beginning here is, so my name again is Laura, and I'm from Bike Walk KC. We are a nonprofit advocacy organization in Kansas City, and our focus is on active transportation, so issues related to biking and walking. And so our mission stated here is to redefine our streets as places for people to build a culture of active living. And so we aren't the only organization that does this, but we do think that what sets us apart is the fact that we combine advocacy and community planning with education. And that might not be something that you find in other organizations like under one roof who do similar work. We also run and maintain the bike share system. That is, you see a lot of that in Kansas City, but it is in Johnson County and also Wyandotte County as well. So we like I said, bring all this under one roof, and we think that's kind of another part that sets us apart from other organizations doing the same kind of work. Amy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say we're quickly getting ready to add a fifth bubble here. Data and research is something that is increasingly more important with what we do. I'm Amy Scribner, Director of Development and Communications. We just released yesterday, day before, in the last 48 hours, the first intensive, deep dive data, qualitative, quantitative analysis of the Gillum cycle track. If you've been on the Gillum Road cycle track, two-way cycle track in Midtown, if you go on our website, we've got a blog on there. So if you're a data geek and want to take a look at and help have a response when people say, I don't ever see people use the bike lanes in Kansas City. Like, we get that a lot. And I'm like, they do. And now we have some numbers to prove that. So data and research is also something that is really, really important to us to help support you as beginning cyclists, for people who want to just explore the city, not in a car. That data is more and more important.
All right, so briefly, here's kind of what our day looks like. I'm going to give the presentation on traffic laws and lane positioning. I'm also going to cover some of the infrastructure that you're seeing popping up around town and explain, how to interact with that, whether you're behind the wheels or behind the handlebar. We'll take a short break after that, and then we will go outside to do skills practice. So that's basically towards the back of the library here and just off to the side. We're going to be in a parking lot. We've got it coned off, so there shouldn't be any moving traffic through there. Another little short break, but then we're going to go on a group ride. So more towards the end of the presentation, I will throw up what the map looks like and has a little cue sheet. I've got some links if you have any GPS or other kind of navigation system that you want to link to. I've got some links, a couple of different links there that you can find the route on. Okay, so first thing that we're going to start with is we were talking about cars and how they can be really, really intimidating. And so when you get out there on a bike, the bottom line that we really need to remember is that a lot of the traffic principles that we apply as vehicle drivers are the same for bike riders. Okay, so you'll see that when we come to an intersection, we're going to apply those same types of principles, like first come, first serve. Okay, so if I come to an intersection with a stop sign, four-way intersection with a stop sign, I'm going to stop, and if a car's coming to the other side, they're going to stop. I get to go because I came first. Okay, so always we ride on the right-hand side of the roadway. So when we teach kids, we call it riding right, go with the flow, and so the same thing for bike riders. This helps put us in a position that is a lot more predictable and is what other vehicle users, road users are used to seeing, as people riding on the right. So pedestrians, we always yield to pedestrians, whether we're driving or we're riding our bikes. We also yield to crossing traffic and when changing lanes. So as slower traffic, again, we are going to be positioning ourselves more towards the right. So when we are on a multi-lane road, we're going to be in the rightmost lane, except for when we're needing to pass maybe a parked car or another rider or something like that. We'll go over some lane position rules, and I'll go through some different situations with intersection positioning. So the thing to know, since we are so close to the state line, is that for the most part, the state laws between Kansas and Missouri are very, very similar. Okay, there are just a few exceptions. Sometimes that just comes down to verbiage. And so we're going to go over that. I'm not going to get too technical into it, but I've also kind of paired the information on these little bookmarks. So Kansas one side, Missouri the other. But also one thing to note is that, so there's the state laws, but then there's also local municipalities may have different laws or codes. Definitely when you're on trails, be sure to familiarize yourself if there's rules at the top of the trailhead. There may be speed rules, things like that. Again, just to reiterate, one of the safest ways to ride your bike is to be predictable. And so again, going through these traffic laws will help aid with that. So, as I stated, all bicyclists have the same rights to the use of the road and the same responsibilities as vehicle drivers. So one of our top things that we tell, we do a lot of youth education programs, that's why I keep referring to kids, but when we teach kids, we tell them to obey all traffic laws and signs. So that's the same thing for a bicycle. So once we're out there, again, we're considered a vehicle. So here's an instance where you'll see just a little bit of the difference between Kansas and Missouri. So riding as near to the right, and there's just a little bit of difference. Kansas says as practicable, and then Missouri says as safe. No person should ride a bike on a sidewalk in a business district, so a lot of interactions with pedestrians coming out of shops, a lot of interactions with driveways and things like that. So within a business district, I actually had an email from somebody from Lee Summit who was asking about riding in a certain area and if they could ride on the sidewalk there. So in Missouri, within a business district, it's clearly stated no riding on the sidewalk there.
Could I add real quick? An example would be like the plaza or Power and Light or probably downtown Lee Summit would be an example of, entertainment or business district.
And here in Overland Park, like we're gonna be riding through downtown Overland Park, so that would not be another area to be riding on the sidewalk.
I was just going to ask a question when it comes to the, stop signs and such. So since we'll be a group, when we stop at the stop sign, are all of us going to proceed at the same time thereafter, or do we have to do kind of the next group stops and the next group stops? Or?
Yeah, so we were discussing, since we have, quite a few people here, how to run the group ride. And one thing that we can do, and I'll touch a little bit more specifically on it later, is, we can all go through as a group just for brevity of, getting us through. But then, what we can do is essentially line up in two abreast, kind of in sets of four, like the wheels of a car. Okay, and so once we stop, check that it's safe for us to go, then that set of four can go through, let the next set of traffic go through, and then, does that make sense?
Like an etiquette or...
You'll see a lot of different things happening out there, and when we're in a group ride, it's, like we're talking about riding individually through this presentation, so, you should always make sure to do what is safe for you. So don't just say, if somebody else says, hey, it's safe to go, just really assume that that means it's safe for them to go. Okay, so, if you do see a car approaching and you don't feel like it's safe, but everybody else is gone, you can stop. Okay, so.
If I remember right, there was a group ride in like Leewood or Prairie Village that blew through some stop signs several years ago, and some of them got tickets because they were kind of all, I think there were probably some angry neighbors that maybe reported them, but I would say best practice is what Laura described, bunching into like a car size of 4 people and moving through 4 at a time or so would be like best practice etiquette.
Mm-hmm. Bicyclists may ride two abreast when not impeding other vehicles. So if you're on a multi-lane road, you are more than welcome to ride with your partner or whoever else is there. Take that lane, because there's a whole nother lane for other traffic to take and pass you safely. So that's not a worry. But if you're on a two-way road, do make sure that you're scanning, you're aware of your surroundings, and if there are vehicles coming up behind you, to make sure you're communicating to whoever else is around you, and then filing into single file so that car can pass when it's safe to do so. And again, so bear in mind, if you're out driving and you're coming across groups of cyclists, hopefully this will help you understand how to interact around them as well. So if you have any questions from that point of view, please ask that as well. So passing, Kansas states specifically that a car has to give at least 3 feet when passing, and Missouri just says has to give a safe distance when passing. Okay, so that's a little subjective. Some people may think buzzing is safe distance, but obviously cyclists would prefer much more. Kansas, again, it's really clear. Okay, give 3 feet. Make sure that you're giving audible signals to pedestrians or other bicyclists when you are overtaking them. So here we are on our group ride, or if you're out on trails and you're coming up behind somebody, again, we're always riding on the right, but when we pass on the left. And so making sure that you're telling whoever you're coming up behind, I'm on your left, ringing your bell as well. With headphones in, people may not hear you. They may have a dog. or whatnot, but making sure that you are letting them know you're coming. For nighttime writing, here's a few. So on the front, we always want a white light. On the back, we always want red. That's very similar to a car, right? And in Kansas and Missouri, they both want a light that is visible from 500 feet away. And in the rear, they want a red reflector that is not obstructed, and you can add a light that's visible from 600 feet away. So Missouri has a few extra rules that they state about having reflectors or lights on moving parts of the bike, so things like the pedals, the wheels, that can be seen from a certain distance. But then they also have some recommendations or requirements for being seen from the side even. So if you guys want those, I can pull those up for you. I just don't want to like overwhelm you with like, oh, well, what's 500 feet and what's 600 feet? And so these are the two top priorities, is to be seen and using lights too that can be help you see.
Yeah, I believe in there's never not enough lights or reflectors. I have on the back of my bike, two lights, one on my back and one on the, this is called the stem. And then, so I have them on my little spook things, and I don't know, I just believe in lots of light.
And if you didn't already pick them up, we have little sets of these blinky lights. And so the red one goes in the back, it blinks red, and then the black one is white. And so again, those are so that people can see you. If you're out walking, you can use those as well. I will mention that those were provided by a grant that we received. And so you can click on the QR code. It will also take you to some safety videos on bikewalkkc.org, which reiterate very nicely a lot of the points that I'm talking about here. Okay, so a lot of people have questions about stop lights that don't change, okay, and when is it okay to go through? And again, we're talking about stop lights, not stop signs right here. So, you're able to move through a red light that hasn't changed after you've come to a complete stop. And what I mentioned here too is that like the signal may be engineered or set up to
Detect.
there you go, to detect like a car, but maybe it's not detecting the bike rider. Okay, so that might be a reason why it's not changing. But after you've come to a complete stop and the light hasn't changed or it's staying red for an unreasonable amount of time, or you've waited for a reasonable amount of time and it still hasn't changed. And as well, no motor vehicle or person is coming through the intersection, that's when you can move through. Okay, so in Missouri, you use something called an affirmative defense. So say you move through a red light, but then afterwards a police officer stops you. Then you say, hey, I came to a complete stop. The light was not changing for me. It wasn't detecting me. And I double checked that there was nobody else coming. Any other traffic had moved through and it was safe for me to go. So that's the affirmative defense. And that's stated in Missouri. Any questions?
What is unreasonable and how common are these types of traffic lights in the area?
So, and from your public works experience, you may have a better explanation for it. So,
I mean, unreasonable, it's written vague on purpose, right? So, I think I try to wait for like at least a minute. But, if you were ever brought to the court of law and needed a lawyer, unreasonable is vague on purpose. But yeah, my rule of thumb is try to wait like a minute. I don't time it, but if it's like, okay, it should have gone through a couple signals by now, it's clearly not. So as far as there's a couple types of traffic signals. Some of them you will see in the pavement. There's little thin lines, which would be like a vehicle has to be on top of it for it to, and the weight of a vehicle has to, in order for the signal to change. So some of them you can actually see in the pavement. It's called like a loop detector, I think. And so those you'll see and you can tell as you ride up to them, it's probably not going to pick you up because it needs a weight of a vehicle in order to change it. A lot of the other ones are actual like camera technology, and so that it's scanning the intersection for any vehicle, whether it be a bike or a car, and I've been told that they're supposed to pick up a person on a bike or a motorcycle, but it doesn't always do that. And then in cities that are a little more advanced, they actually have bike detection, which is just fancier cameras or something like that to actually detect a bike or pedestrian. So a lot of the times, and I've worked with people on the public works side of things, like on bike routes where we have actual bike infrastructure, can we make sure we're upgrading this type of technology? It fell on deaf ears at the time, but I think that's something worth working on, right? When we know it's a route that a lot of people are using, it makes sense to upgrade technology to make sure it's detecting bikes.
And sometimes you can sense that, right? Even in your car, you're like, come on, like, why isn't this moving? And so, like she mentioned, unreasonable is subjective and vague on purpose, but I think you would get that sense, if you're just standing and standing and standing.
I've also looked at the age of the traffic signal pole itself, and you can tell if it's like really old and kind of janky looking that it hasn't been upgraded with newer technology. So that's just something, because I spent some time working in public works, so I nerd out about that kind of thing. But I'll be curious when we ride today. I'll kind of look and see if I can tell what kind of technology they have here.
And to your second question, we have a long ways to go to get them all automated. So don't be surprised that if more than half are not, depending on where you ride.
Sometimes I'll pop up and press the pedestrian crosswalk because I know that it'll be an older intersection and it's not going to affect me. Is that ever normal, or is that
I see a lot of people do it. I would just say, along with doing that, make sure though that you are able to get back on the road safely. Because using the pedestrian crosswalk to ride your bike through, we don't really recommend doing that. That pedestrian crosswalk is there for the pedestrians, and so you're a vehicle, considered a vehicle. So, make sure that space is clear for those pedestrians. But a lot of people do that because, whether it connects and really reacts, because sometimes our buttons don't actually do what they're supposed to do.
I would add on to that, big roads, like I'm thinking Linwood, because this is the one through Midtown that I have to cross, and it's 4 lanes and it's very wide. So I don't like to do dead red on Linwood just because people go really fast. And so that'll be a case sometimes where I'll pop off and hit the button, but then I walk across as a pedestrian.
okay?
So I get to the other side of the intersection, walk my bike through the intersection, so I'm not violating what the crosswalk's meant to do, and I'll hop back on the other side.
Because I have to cross out this traffic way.
Oof, yeah.
And then it's just I'm not going to,
Are you crossing at Valentine?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one can often not catch you, and so I have to cross that too, so I understand exactly where you're coming from.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I won't.
No, so I totally understand though what you're doing. Okay, so just kind of as a review, putting all of that together along with making sure, again, we're riding predictably, visibly, and confidently. Those are some really good pro tips for cycling. Before we move forward, any other questions on the laws? I mean, you can read through the statutes yourself. They're not that difficult to understand. And again, I tried to make sure that we're just talking in a conversational tone. So that's how these are written on your little bookmark here. But any questions?
So when you're in traffic and you come to an intersection, a stoplight, are you supposed to move forward? I know sometimes there are intersections where they have the bike lane that goes to the front. Is that something that you think should be, should you just stay where you are on your bike? Because that's what I tend to do, is just stay.
Right, so when we're gonna come across a lot of different situations, and you might have experienced a lot of different situations, the thing I always keep in the back of my head is what's predictable? What would another car do in this situation? And so kind of like you're talking about, which is advancing to the front of some queued cars, I would not recommend unless there's a specific facility for that. And I have a picture of it actually. Again, that's confusing. If if you saw another car creeping up in front of a line of queued cars, like, I don't even like that sometimes on, like, you know, merges and stuff like that, when it's like,
Because you know, motorcycles sometimes will squeeze up and stuff like that, you know, I think that's the same.
At Mass and 14, that's how the
yeah.
bicycle lane, it tries to make you go to the front.
Yeah.
I think it depends on where you are, the level of acceptance of people doing that. We were just in New York City, everybody cuts through traffic waiting there. You don't see it as much here, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it, because in addition to being predictable, which is the most important thing, we're also sort of like setting the tone for other bicyclists, and we just that's something to keep in mind, right? When it's not a good look for when people run through red lights or weaving through traffic. It's not only not safe, which is the most important thing, but it also doesn't really help the cause of wanting bikes and cars to get along in a happy place. So that's sort of another more political reason why we should be following rules and being predictable.
I mean, I can understand it, because if cars are turning right and you get all the bikes through the intersection more quickly, and then people can turn right without having to worry about looking over. But I guess they'd still have to look over anyway, because there's a bike lane. So.
We'll probably talk and practice today. I mean, this is the foundation, right? But every situation's different, and you have to make the best call when you're out there for what's safe for you.
In front of me.
Right. And so we may have to deal with that today, right? Something that's not by the book, but a gut that we have to do to make ourselves feel safer out there.
Okay, so moving right into that topic, the facilities, or, you know, what are communities doing to either indicate where bike riders can ride, you know, again, how do we interact with it on our bikes, but also when other people are using it and maybe we're in a vehicle or a different mode of transportation. So, you know, we're pretty familiar, or we should be seeing more and more bike lanes popping up. There's different varieties of them, everything from, you know, just a section of the road that is designated by like a single stripe, to getting like an actual buffer between the bike lane and the moving cars, so we just feel a little bit more comfortable. One other thing that I want to kind of mention before I move off this slide about bike lanes is that, you know, yes, they are great for bike riders, but they're also really great for pedestrians, because it's putting that much more distance between the moving traffic and people who are riding or walking on the sidewalk. So, you know, depending on where you are, you can see there's this little tiny buffer of grass right here. In some communities, you'll see a lot of buffer between the sidewalk and the cars, and maybe it's, you know, some green area right there. But then there's other parts where there is absolutely no buffer between the sidewalk and moving traffic. So I'm thinking of, you know, places like Truman Road, or maybe just some space in your community where high volume of traffic is going through. Rainbow Boulevard, I'm thinking now, you know, things like that. So use them as you would any other lane. So you're gonna ride right. You'll see that the arrows are there to, one, indicate which direction you should go, also helping remind traffic that bicyclists should be riding that way. Watch for cars that pass and turn right. You have to yield, because if you don't, you may not be riding your bike much longer. And just do be aware that some bike lanes may be unsafe, whether there's debris that falls into them, there's other parked vehicles that are in there that is against the law. That is a lane for bikes, so cars should not be parking there. However, some do. Maybe there is like potholes or things like even stormwater grates, you know, other things like that that may be in the bike lane. So just do be aware of those types of things.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. Back on the other slide. In the right-hand picture, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in that for the drivers, you know, people crossing the street, there's traffic parked. What's your general feeling about wearing a visibility vest or something, a neon, you know, one of those neon green or neon orange things? Because I don't know, if I was riding on that thing, I'd be worried that nobody would see me.
You know, I mean, I definitely think that those help. I think it's one of the tools that you can have with you to be seen. But if there's a car driver who's distracted, it doesn't matter kind of, you know, if you're lit up like a Christmas tree, if somebody is not watching and paying attention, that is there as well, right? So I do encourage to wear clothing that is bright and is makes you very visible. We'll talk about where to put yourself in a lane so that you're visible, but do just remember a lot of this also depends on the other road users paying attention, having their eyes up and not being distracted too. So I don't mean to say that to scare you, but it's a consideration, right? And so also with the addition of bike lanes onto roads, there is, you know, a perception that the road is more narrow. And so cars are driver behavior would be then to drive slower down a more narrow lane. So there's another added benefit. And hopefully, you know, through these situations that we're showing you, if you have driven on them or have ridden your bike on there, hopefully you're noticing that traffic is moving slower. But sometimes that's just, you know, human behavior. Maybe people are not driving as slow, but.
And I would just reiterate that, you know, more bicycle infrastructure is what we all want, right? And especially the kind that protects us. Like, I don't know if we'll ride on any today, but I'm sure Laura has some photos here in a second, you know, that actually physically separates us from traffic. We want more of that. But at the same time, there are conflict points still. And so, Laura, to your point about this false sense of security, even though we're in a protected bike lane, we still need to be watchful for hazards or conflict points at intersections, you know, people turning or pedestrians. So just want to throw that out as an extra to reiterate that point.
Yep. So here's just another example of a bike lane. This one is parking protected. This is on Armour Road in Midtown. And so you'll see that we have the bike lane here, a buffered space, and then parking, and then the 2 lanes. So there's kind of an increase in the perception of comfort and safety from that very first one I showed you that was off Southwest Boulevard, where it was just a single line. It was right next to moving traffic and then moving into the buffered space, and now this one's parking protected. So cycle tracks are coming up online a little bit more now, and so we have one that the Gillum cycle track, North Kansas City has one on Diamond Parkway, and so these aren't only for bikes in Kansas City. Runners can use them. People with other micro-mobility, like scooters, can use them, things like that. So what's really great about this is that it brings a whole nother group of people out who can help talk about making roads safer for everybody. So I've talked to other cyclists who get really upset when they see people who aren't on bikes on cycle tracks. But again, the whole thing is safer infrastructure, and we should be welcoming to other road users and encouraging, again, a whole nother subset of people to use these facilities so that they can move freely through the city. This is a left turn box, and so these will be found at intersections, and essentially what this does is it kind of takes away that stress of turning against traffic when you're making a left-hand turn. And so I'm gonna show a video because this is really kind of, let me see if I can get to where I can show you this video, because I feel like explaining it doesn't do it justice, and watching it really is the best way to explain how to use this. Come on. So we'll watch it and then I'll kind of talk about it. So did that kind of make sense, what she did? So here on this aerial, this is part of the bike lane here, okay? That green paint indicates that there's going to be an intersection coming up, okay? So you'll see that. But what happens is the bike rider would come up here and they would stay in that lane and they would move towards the bike box. So instead of crossing traffic to get into the left turn only lane, they're able to use the flow of traffic and then move through the intersection and reposition themselves after they've gotten to the far side of the intersection. And what they do then is, just reorient themselves so that when the light then changes green for them, they get to move straight on through. And they're already queued ahead of the other traffic that's right there. But do you see how it's placed in front of the crosswalk? This would be the stop bars for the traffic, the other traffic. Does that make sense? This is something you can do whether there's a bike box there or not. I've been in other cycling classes where we've done it without the painted box right there. So again, that's an option if you're in an area where maybe you weren't quite aware that your left turn was coming or it wasn't safe to cross traffic to make that left-hand turn. And so it's a neat little kind of elegant little technique. Did you have anything to
I was
add?
just going to say I have a funny story about this intersection. So when it was being designed, they were flipped to the other corners, and I reviewed the design and I was like, hang on a second. Let me go show you where they need to be. So it was like about to be striped and painted, and luckily I took a closer look at it. I was like, these are in the wrong spot. I can show you how. So even people designing them don't always know how to use them, but they are handy, and I try to do it every time I'm at this intersection just to teach drivers what they are and how to use them. But to Laura's point, and maybe we'll practice this today if there's a situation, you can kind of do that with a crosswalk if that green box wasn't there, which is kind of a nice practice to keep in back of mind. Is it's a technique you can use just in a normal crosswalk as well.
And just out of curiosity, would you recommend doing this technique? Because there's like right on red, so wouldn't it be kind of in the spot where people might be turning right?
So if you're positioned right here, and with bike lanes, there's not generally turn on reds
I think
allowed.
in Missouri you cannot turn right on red, if I'm not mistaken, but in Kansas you can.
You can in Missouri.
You can in Missouri.
Yeah, I was going to say
So I think it used to not.
I would, how do I want to answer this? I never worry about a car stopped behind me. If they need to wait, they have to wait. Similar if it was no designated right turn and a car was in front wanting to go straight, that car would have to wait anyway, right? I know it can make you feel weird if you're there holding up a car, so sometimes I may scoot forward a little bit and like wave to the car, like go ahead around me if I can see their blinkers on and they're wanting to turn right. I've done that before just to be courteous. And then a total side note, the city of Kansas City, Missouri is actually trying to eliminate right turns on reds as a policy because it is very unsafe both for pedestrians and bicyclists. It's part of their Vision Zero program, which is sort of a national safety emphasis that a lot of cities have adopted. So right turns on red, people do them all the time. There's certain intersections now where they are not allowed and there's a little sign, no turn on red.
Yeah, it's weird, because I thought like 10 years ago it was illegal, but
Yeah, I think to Laura, you were just saying, I think on this corridor, they've put signs up most places to eliminate that, but there's still a handful of places where it's technically legally allowed.
Mm-hmm. And again, to Maggie's point about
no, I
if
I'm not too worried about
oh yeah, but I mean, I kind of want to take away from or emphasize that, you know, again, how would you handle things as a vehicle driver? And so if you were parked or you were queued here as a vehicle driver and somebody behind you wanted to turn right, right, they have to wait. And so, you know, there's hopefully something there that can tell you and alleviate a little bit of that perceived pressure from other road users that you're holding people up or that you don't belong there, because you do belong there. And again, if I was sitting in my car, you know, wanting to go straight through and somebody behind me wanted to turn right, they'd still have to wait. So So this was what you were talking about, where there is indication that bike riders can come and queue in front of cars, so that when the light changes, they can move away from all this traffic, especially if they want to make turns across traffic. So you would ride up this side of all the queued cars and then position yourself here. Again, I would not really do this unless that facility was there. Again, there's the confusion with the cars. Some people may care, may not care, but again, I go back to, if you were a car, would you be able to sneak up alongside everybody else just to get in front? And no.
I have found this type of facility has the least amount of driver compliance with it, like because of where it's positioned, right, which was the inside of the crosswalk, as opposed to what we just saw, which was on the outside of the crosswalk. Cars often, almost often, if there's a car there, it's pulled over the green line. And so I don't want to block the crosswalk, right, as an alternative. So these are a little trickier. I think in this case, I've actually made up my own little left turn box here, because I couldn't get over because a car was blocking this. A car was blocking this part here, so I went ahead and went across and did like the 2-stage left turn in this situation. And I've had to do that several times with this type of facility because cars usually block it, unfortunately.
And a lot of this comes with practice too, and building confidence. And so, these are facilities put out there to aid, people who maybe don't have a lot of confidence and whatnot. But, the way that you do end up interacting with it, knowing like you can make your own 2-stage left turn box and stuff like that, will help you, as you start to encounter more of this. Okay, any questions really quick about facilities, any ones that maybe I didn't really highlight or talk about that you had questions on? Okay, so we're going to talk about lane positioning because we are talking about riding on the road. And so rule of thumb is to choose the rightmost lane that suits your destination. Your position in the lane dictates how well people can see you, if you're able to avoid hazards, plus it puts you in a more predictable space. Again, because we're on the road, we want to kind of act like we would if we were a car. So right here you can see these 3 figures are lined up kind of according to where they may be traveling to. One thing to note that I always just like to put out, so this is 2-way traffic is what's indicated on this little diagram, is I'm not wholeheartedly a fan of where this bike rider is. Okay, so we were just talking about cars coming up next to you and maybe making a right-hand turn. If you are as far over to the right as putting yourself next to the sidewalk or the curb, you are not really communicating to those behind you like, hey, I'm in this space, this is my spot, and they may feel that they have the right or the space to move up next to you and make a right-hand turn, right? So by law, you are to indicate your turns and your stops, whether you're in a vehicle or on your bike, and you're supposed to do that about 100 feet ahead of where you're going to make that turn. And so, if the car is right next to us, it may be hard for us to even see if they're turning, okay? So a few considerations, that's my little note about just this little picture here. I would encourage people to be kind of along, you see those darker wheel ruts sometimes on the road. I think those are good places to be, and we'll talk about taking a lane, and so fully being yourself right in the middle. We'll talk about when it's appropriate to do that and not do that. So when we're riding, here's some really key communication skills and we will practice these, and we'll be looking for these once we go out on our group ride. The first one to indicate that you may be doing something, whether it's planning a move over or you're just looking around to be aware, is scanning. So turning your head and looking behind you, making sure that you're aware of what's going on behind you. This is a really important skill to have, as well as maintaining a straight line after you've turned your head. So, you know, a lot of us may sit at computers, be kind of stuck in this forward hunched position. So when we turn our head, we may inadvertently also be kind of turning our handlebars. So the ability to be able to turn, look behind us, but maintain that straight line is really an important one to practice. It's great to do in an empty parking lot or on a trail or something like that when there's not a lot of people around. If you have tightness up here in your chest, maybe doing a few stretches or something to kind of open that up. You can also, as you're riding, you can take a hand off the handlebar. So if you're going to look over your left shoulder, maybe kind of loosening your grip on the left-hand side so that you're able to open up your chest rather than pull it with you by maintaining both hands on the handlebars. Signaling. So here we have some examples of signaling. I think the easiest thing to do is point the direction you're going to go. Okay, so it really takes the ambiguity out of it when you're just saying, I'm going left, I'm going right. This is an acceptable turn signal to indicate you're going right. A lot of people appreciate this because it's in the sight line of the driver behind you. Also, and I don't know how many people really think that much about this, but you know, when you're riding, your brake, generally for the front brake, is on the left-hand side. Okay, so as somebody's braking, they may be afraid that if they have to take the hand off over here, but they need to slow down, that they're only pressing on that front brake, so they may be a little bit uncomfortable with that, and so they choose to do this so that they can maintain braking in the rear. Does that make sense? So this is acceptable, but again, in my opinion, the clearest is to just point the direction you're gonna go. Cars don't indicate when they're going forward. I love it when we teach the kids, and they're always like, yeah, this is to say we're going forward, and it's like, we all just kind of go, don't we? When we indicate that we're slowing and stopping, we're going to use our left arm, and we're going to put it out at an angle, again, so it's in that sight line of the vehicle driver behind us. If you ever have a question about, okay, I'm slowing, I'm coming to a stop, do I indicate my turn first or my stop? My recommendation is always to indicate that you are slowing. Okay, so if we think about cars, whether people choose to use their turn signals or not, when they push the brake lights show up, right? Could be hard for somebody behind you to understand that you're actually slowing. That perception may be off, so also indicating it. I really highly recommend practicing showing your stops, okay? And once you fully stop, then you're free to take your hands off and show which way you're gonna go, okay? When we're on group rides, a few other little signs that you may see people doing, they may be pointing down because they're showing a hazard or something that's in the road. When you're signaling, make sure that it is very clear what you're doing. So I always like to say, make it loud and proud, okay? So at least shoulder up to your shoulder and hold it out for a couple of seconds. Again, do it before you're gonna make the actual turn. So with kids and adults, I have seen that people are indicating they're gonna turn and they keep that arm out while they're turning. Be safe, indicate what you're doing, put your hands back on, and then execute the maneuver, okay? Okay, so here we are at intersections, just a few little examples of where to place yourself in a lane. And so this has 2 left turn lanes, and this car is heading down towards out the bottom of the diagram. And so again, understanding we want to be in the rightmost lane that suits our destination is why this bike rider is indicated in this left turn lane. If this person relatively quickly after they made that turn was going to make another left-hand turn, I would recommend to put yourself here, okay? Does that make sense? But if you were just going to make your left-hand turn and continue down for several blocks, choosing this one is totally appropriate, okay?
And that's to eliminate having to merge really quickly once you're on that other street. And we will have a situation where we turn right today and then need to turn left really quickly. So I think instead of figuring out how to merge really quickly, we're gonna go ahead and just turn into the left side of we'll talk about it, I'll show you on the map.
Yep. This is a one-way that has multiple lanes, okay? And so this cyclist is moving straight through, so again, they're the rightmost lane that suits their destination. And then this one who is turning to the left has gotten into the left lane, has probably indicated that they are turning, and then you see them again moving into that far right lane. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I found that a lot of times with the double left turn lane, the drivers in the left lane often don't realize it's a double left turn. This is from a driver perspective, and often will move into the right turn lane. Is there any advice as a biker how to prevent that?
I would say even being aware of it and like being a little more defensive in that moment, maybe anticipating that car may get in front of you, so go and taking it a little slower. You're probably going to go through complex intersections like this a little slower anyway, so I would imagine the car would probably have ample time to get in front of you, but even being aware that's a potential conflict point can kind of put yourself on, being vigilant and anticipating that could happen. Mm-hmm. But I think to the point Laura said earlier about where you are positioned in the lane and making sure you're more towards the middle of the lane instead of you super right side of the lane will help you be more visible in that instance. I don't think there's any way to like completely prevent what you're describing from happening, just because in that situation there'd be a pretty wide road, right? And it's just always going to be a possible conflict point, whether you're on a bike or in a car.
Yeah. And I mean, I think really, again, that is some of the best advice is to be aware of it so that you can think about it ahead of time and say, okay, well, if this car was going to, say, move in front of me, you've just given yourself just a little bit more proactive space to handle it. If it was an ideal world, people would stay in their lane. And they would indicate if they were going to switch lanes well ahead of it with lots of signaling and, due courtesy. But we're going to be, everybody's going to be riding in several different areas. So I've mentioned this before, and this is the concept of taking a lane. So knowing when the road is actually wide enough to be able to share space with a car versus when you should take your space, and make sure that if they need to pass you, that they're only doing so when it's safe to do so. Here you can see an example of a very narrow lane. So this cyclist does not have this recommended 3 to 4 feet to the right of that car. So again, their ability to like avoid hazards, or if they wanted to turn left, is now compromised by the fact that that car has taken that space. So what we would encourage through practice and confident building is to take the lane. Okay, again, I never worry about necessarily if cars are getting upset with me, because just by virtue of being on a bike, I'm slower than them. Again, people drive at all different speeds. And if I was in a car and I was driving slow, they'd still have to deal with that, right? I have the right to the road. I'm going to make sure that I'm safe, but I'm not doing it intentionally to bother or to irritate anybody. It's just, and hopefully in a situation like this, maybe I'm aware that I'm not going to be either on that narrow lane for very long, or, that's just the way it is. They got to just wait.
And I have a bit of a tough skin because people will yell. The reality is, something happens to people when they get in their car, and like politeness sometimes gets ratcheted down a couple of notches. So.
But it's much better than it was.
It is.
I remember every time I would leave my house to ride, I would get honked or yelled at. And now it's, knock on wood, twice in the last year. Mm-hmm. So I think, part of the work what KC's doing, right, is to kind of change that culture. There's more people riding, there's facilities now. So it is changing. It is. And I would emphasize here, when I first learned about this 10 years ago, I was all tripped up about, oh my God, how am I gonna calculate how wide the lane is when I'm out there? Like, how am I gonna figure out how, and now that I know most lanes in this part of the country are 11 or 12 foot, or the standards that the cities build them to. You know, maybe out in southern Johnson County, you might have 14-foot lanes. I would say my preference for myself is to always take the lane. Even if it's a 2-lane road, I always feel better taking the lane. And I don't try to do the calculations in my head while I'm riding. How wide is it? Is it wide enough to share? By default, I just always feel better. I'm avoiding gravel and grit and fear of popping a tire. And then we often see people start out on the left-hand side here of wanting to hug the road because they feel safer. But if you think about it, you're providing yourself a little bit more pocket and bubble of space if you are here in the middle. And so it's almost kind of contrary to what, if you're not as confident of a rider, you want to hug the right side so that you're further away from the cars. But looking at this diagram, you're going to get squeezed over by a car just being, so it's a little bit counterintuitive, but I always think of it as I'd rather have a bubble around me in the lane and have cars go around than I would be squished by a car and buzzed by on the right side.
I have the mantra, I have the right to exist, I have the right to exist, I have the right, like, I am in the middle of the lane, and so just gonna have to deal with it, because you have every right to be there, like, full confidence, yeah.
And we talk about it, it's easier sometimes said than done. Again, the more you're out there riding in different situations, the more your confidence is going to grow. And so, you know, today, hopefully we will be giving you guys gentle feedback and encouragement, you know, if we're noticing like this is a good space to take the lane, you know, we're here with you. But also, again, employing those other skills like scanning and making sure you're aware of what's happening around you really help build the sense that you are a confident bike rider to other people around you. Because if people think that they can squeeze by you, you know, and you feel your skills aren't there, your confidence isn't there, that is going to kind of put you in more of a hazardous position. But again, use those skills, practice this, and the more you do it, the better you'll feel, and it'll be easier. The next types of things that we're going to do really quick, I'm going to do a couple of demonstrations here while we're inside and it's quiet and you guys can keep sitting, ask me questions. But as soon as we go outside, I'm going to be looking for you guys to be doing some of these things. The starting and stopping, the straight line practice with scanning, hand signals and shifting, we're going to need our bikes for that, okay? So before I go into the helmet fitting, quick check, and the bike fit, I want you guys to take a look real quickly at where we're going to be riding. I do believe that this should have been sent out in an email through Eventbrite ahead of time, but we can definitely talk about any of these situations, any of these turns. Here we are at the library, this is it, and so we are going to head south first, over to the east, and then back up north. The place that Maggie was talking about with quick merge over into the left turn lane is right down here when we come off 91st onto Antioch. So there's 91st Terrace is what we are looking to turn left onto, and so this is a short space right here. But what our recommendations are going to be is that when it's safe to do so and we make this right-hand turn, we're going to turn and put ourselves where we can more immediately make a left-hand turn. Does that make sense? So we're not going to merge over. Is this the section you wanted to kind of show people? Okay.
So Antioch's 4 lanes, I believe. So we will be
I think I can put my dude here.
turning right into the leftmost lane here, because we're going to very quickly, it's like half a block, then we're going to turn left. So we may have to hang out in traffic for a minute, which will make us uncomfortable, but I think it's the safer way to kind of navigate this intersection. And we'll just stand there in that left lane with our hands out turning left, and then wait for oncoming traffic to clear, and then we'll make our left turn.
Okay, so this is, I believe, the street that we are going to
Oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was.
turn on right here. So this is the one where we want to go left. Sorry, the mouse is super delayed from what I'm doing on my screen to when I turn around and look. And then I think where we are turning right is from back over there.
Maybe I lied about the 12-foot lanes. Those look pretty narrow. I'll have to measure them.
This is an older part of town.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are sections of Gradient that are not as wide.
So, when it comes to choosing between riding in the road or riding on the sidewalks, obviously we have the business district to take into consideration, Missouri, but would you say it's just a question of what your route is, what your confidence levels are? Because admittedly, my mother lives in Olathe, right off of Black Bog Road. People are going 45 miles an hour, everybody's going 55 miles an hour. I don't necessarily want to be on the street.
Yeah, those are.
It always feels kind of weird to ride on the sidewalk.
So I've got a great example of, we always hesitate to teach riding on the sidewalk because you're more visible. There's different kinds of conflicts on a sidewalk, right? Visibility concerns, driveways, people walking. So I work now at Burns and McDonald, which is at 95th and Ward Parkway and Warnell, which are like huge arterial roads. And we ride with our 3-year-old in a trailer. And there is a pretty decent way to get there and get home, except for the very end, where there's like half a mile, which you have no choice. It's either Ward Parkway or Warnell Road. And so I have hopped on the sidewalk to get us to the neighborhood street. And so it's just 2 blocks or something on the sidewalk with the trailer in the back. So there are cases where if you're crossing a big street or you have a very short stint, I don't know that any cycling book is going to tell you that, but it goes back to one of those things, make the call that you need to make. And as long as you're not in a business district, it's technically not. When kids learn to ride their bikes to school, a lot of the times parents feel better with them riding on the sidewalks to get to school. So anyway, that's an example of where pretty much one of the only times I'll hop on the sidewalk is those 2 roads.
Yeah, and I have one in Johnson County, so like sometimes when I'm ambitious, I will pay my rent and I'll ride my bike. But I live like at Shawnee Mission Parkway in Metcalf, and I'm going to like 95th and I'm kind of by the Quick Trip over here off Lenexa, 935, 435 area. So there's a section between 79th and about 83rd that I will ride on the sidewalk because I'm on Quivira. And so, and it's wide enough. So if you even think about like not riding on Metcalf, but they have that super huge sidewalk. So I kind of look at it from that perspective too, is if you're on those busy streets, they've made concessions.
And it does seem to me that in a lot of Johnson County towns or cities, whatever, they're trying to turn the sidewalks into bike lanes because I see often enough those little green signs with the bicycle like right next to the sidewalk.
Well, and then there's those ultra-wide sidewalks, which are maybe multi-use paths, right? So, they're bigger than the typical, like maybe 4 or 5 foot wide sidewalk you could see in older neighborhoods. So a good example is in Prairie Village. There at 71st and Mission, you'll see that because they have created a buffer, but a super wide sidewalk, as you head south down Mission Road, you'll see a lot of bike riders there. Still, there's a lot of driveways to be aware of, plus intersections. So, you still have to obey stopping and taking care of yourself and being aware of what's going on around you. But those wider paths that are there, yeah.
But I would say for the most part, I've been not overly uncomfortable. That's a very fine line, right? Of riding on the streets in Johnson County.
Yeah.
And that's where I mostly ride between here and like 95th Street, 103rd kind of thing, or I'm sorry, my place out there, and I've not really felt uncomfortable on the roads at any point in time. We just follow traffic rules and, and it's the only time I've really been on there. And I've crossed Metcalf, but I've not really ridden on the sidewalks between. So,
this is making me think about, I think these classes are so great because it's like anyone and everyone's welcome to them, right? There are some that I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I'm just saying in cities, there are groups who do classes, but it's more recreational cycling where people wear the Lycra and they have super nice, fancy fast bikes. And so you may see or hear from people who, with that level of confidence, would never ride on the sidewalk and say, no, never. I'm always on the road. So you may see these people going like 25 miles an hour on their carbon fiber road bikes that they're, so I would just reiterate again, I think the theme for me with these classes is like whatever makes you comfortable, follow the rules, make sure you're being predictable, but I think all in all, there are cases where you're gonna make a decision because you feel safer hopping on the sidewalk for 3 blocks or something like that.
Well, and sometimes I drive it. I drive a path to kind of see if I want to do that or not and see how it feels driving it and then kind of go from there. So.
Yeah, so I think they're both putting together a lot of great points here. One is to know your route, be prepared to ride it. We've gone over kind of more of the technical statutes of how to ride on the road. So now you know the rules, you can break them. I'm not really saying break rules, but again, if the only path to get, say, to your mom's house or whatever, there is a short segment where you're riding on the sidewalk, you've made that decision because it's in your best interest. And I don't really think there's going to be a ton of people who are enforcing, whether you should be riding on the sidewalk or not. So I want to move us ahead. Really quickly, any other questions on the route? So again, I said we're heading south first, and then we're going to go to the east, head north, and we will go into downtown Overland Park. So we're going to have some wider lanes of traffic and stoplights and things like that we're stopping at. We're going to go to that northmost little red segment so that we're basically making some right-hand turns to get across things like Metcalf here, heading back towards the west and then down south again. So, okay, so let me go ahead and cover these little demonstrations really quick so that I can get you guys to go for a break if you need it, and then get your bikes ready. So the first thing that I'm going to cover and do a little demonstration on is helmet fitting. And making sure that, our helmet looks good and is safe to use. A lot of people ask, how often should I replace my helmet? If you're taking good care of it and you aren't leaving it in extreme conditions like outside, exposed to the sun, or it's getting wet and then it's getting really cold, all that kind of stuff. Your helmet should last a while. They do say every 3 years or so, but that could be, helmet manufacturers wanting you to buy new helmets. So again, if you're taking good care of your helmet, you haven't dropped it, you have not been in a crash, your helmet should last you for a while. This one this is a newer one that I bought. It was on sale, but I always want to check and make sure that the outside looks good, that it's not cracked. If I look inside at this foam in here, that I don't see big chips taken out of it or dents. So my helmet has a inner frame here, and so when I go to put my helmet on, I want to make sure that that frame has been opened up so that it'll fit on my head and I can adjust it as necessary. This is the back. Some helmets will say even front and back. We've seen people who put this style in the front, but it goes in the back, so do be aware, okay? The visor does no good if it's in the back either, so that's a good indicator of front and back, okay? So I'm gonna put the helmet on, and the way I make sure that it is far enough down over my forehead, as well as covering the back of my head, is I use 2 fingers, and basically I put 2 fingers over my eyebrow. So between my eyebrow and the rim of the helmet, I can fit about this much space. Again, my forehead is covered and the back of my head is protected, okay? Next, I take the dial and I tighten it to the point where if I tip my head over and shake it without buckling this, the helmet stays on my head. Okay, so this is what keeps my helmet on my head where it needs to be. It's not these guys, okay? It's that inner frame that I've tightened, and yeah, make sure that it's in the right spot. Next, these straps are gonna go on either side of my ears. If they're adjustable, this little piece should fit right under your earlobes. Not too tight, but not too far down. And then what I'm going to do is I buckle it, and I should be able to fit maybe 2 fingers under here at least, so I can open my mouth and use it. But it's also not flapping around and causing issues, okay? So that's helmet fitting. Other people ask questions about where to buy a bike helmet, what type of bike helmet. There's all different kinds of like impact protection, you know, rating, things like that. But all helmets are made to at least the same consumer safety standards. And buy the helmet that you're gonna wear. Okay, so don't buy it because somebody else talked you into it or whatnot. You know, I was like really drawn to this color, and so, you know, I wear it because I like the color, right? But I do wear it to protect my head. But buy the helmet that you will wear, okay? So if it's uncomfortable but somebody talked you into it, don't do that, okay? But that's basically how we fit our helmets. Any questions?
Okay, wear a hat under your helmet.
So as long as, again, you know, it's not obstructing your view, you are able to make sure it fits in every other way. Lots of people wear hats under their helmet, so.
There are no helmet laws in Kansas, Missouri, but everybody here would strongly encourage you to wear a helmet. But I also see plenty of people who do not, so.
On our ride today, we want you to wear helmets, okay? If you don't have a helmet, I have one that we can give for you, okay? So the ABC Quick Check. This is a really quick 30-second check that I do, that we really encourage everybody to do before you go for a ride and make sure that your bike is safe to ride. If you wanted to perform some maintenance on your bike, this is also a good check that you can do. So each of my little letters and words stands for something. So A stands for air. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check that there is air in my tires. So I lean over my bike and I give it a nice pinch to make sure that they're tight. We like to say kind of tight like a basketball. B is for brakes. So most of our bikes should have 2 brakes. Okay, so we're going to check for both of them. And what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze those levers, and I rock the bike forward and backwards. If my brakes are engaged, the wheels won't move. It may skid while we're right here on carpet or whatever, but you get the general idea. Also, something to check for when you are pulling those brake levers back is that your brake lever is not touching your handlebars. That decreases your stopping power, and so, you know, we want maybe, you know, be able to put our thumb or something like that in between there. As I say that, and look how far back I'm able to pull my levers, so do as I say, not as I do, right here. C is for chain, and also everything that chain kind of runs around, okay? So, and I'm sorry, I brought a completely dirty bike, but what we do when we check for our chain is basically we just backpedal our pedals, okay? And if everything's moving really smoothly right there, we know that things on the chain ring are moving well, that there's nothing obstructing the cassette back here. It should kind of just purr when you're turning it. If it's clunking or it's getting kind of hung up, we may need to move the bike pedals forward and it'll shift where it needs to go. But we're also looking for things like we don't want, I don't know, string, hair, leaves, mud, okay, caked up into our chain. If you want to do a little check just to make sure that it's lubed well, you can run your finger along the chain. I actually wax my chains so they don't have actual lube on them. They have a wax coating. But what you're looking for when you do something like this is just 2 little parallel lines of like grease on your fingers. You don't want big globs, a really big dark streak, okay? We want it lubed enough that it's gonna move smoothly, but we don't want it to collect a lot of grit and dirt and mud and things like that. Quick stands for quick release. These are levers that you might find at different points on your bike. Sometimes they're here at the seat post. Here's a quick lever down on by my hubs here on my wheels. So these quickly release the tension of whatever they're holding. Okay, so if I was to flip this open, essentially I can drop my wheel out of my front fork here because I've opened that quick release. So when we do it here on our seat post, that's where we can quickly raise and lower our saddle. but there's an open, closed position. Make sure that those are in the closed and locked position. The check yourself is where we're just gonna kind of take an eye over our entire self. So if I have something around my waist, if I have shoelaces that are untied and could get into any moving parts of the bike, those are the things that I'm looking for, is to just check myself before I wreck myself. So A, B, C, quick check, super fast. Do it before any ride, just so that you are good to go. Again, if you want to do some maintenance, that's a good starting point too. Like, I'm going to check my tires, I'm going to check my brakes. So all of that. Any questions on that? When we go outside, I'd like to see, or as you guys move towards your bikes, I would like to see you guys doing that check. Let me know if you have any questions. The last thing I want to talk quickly about is bike fit. So, making sure that your bike fits ensures that you're also able to do your bike handling skills without any issues. We see a lot of people who ride with their seats very, very low. So you'll see that there's a really big bend in their knees. Sometimes those knees are coming up next to their elbows. It's not a very efficient way to ride your bike. If your seat is up way too high, you may also be hyperextending your knees, as well as kind of putting a lot of stress on your undercarriage. And again, that's maybe not safe to ride. It's not going to encourage you to ride in the long run as well. So what we're looking for, just very quickly, is when I stand next to my bike, I'm looking for my seat to be at about my hip, okay? Hips are where like your hands go in your pockets, okay? So it's not up here at your waist, it's more here at this wider section. So when I stand next to my bike, my seat is about hip height here, okay? When I get on my bike, I actually should not be able to sit on my seat easily, okay? So again, this comes to making sure that the seat is at a height where my leg can get proper extension so that I can be powerful and strong, but also not too extended that I can't comfortably reach my pedals. Does that make sense? We also want to make sure that if we adjust our seat to the right height, that the nose of the seat or the saddle is in line with this top tube of the bike, okay? There's other things that you can adjust on your bike to make sure that it fits properly, but we're kind of talking about at least getting it to the right height, so again, you can get almost full extension without hyperextension on your legs. Any questions? Nope. Okay.